This is the story of how on March 14th, 1981, three men, all endowed with outstanding stamina and skill, inspired by an unflinching resolve, reached the top of the world's highest mountain and came back unscathed to rejoin their comrades. On February 5th, 1981, the expedition readied, loading supplies and climbing equipment into the vehicle that would take them on the first leg of their journey.
Our plans were to travel the first part to 4th Street by motor car, and then after a brief rest on 4th Street we'd start the long pack into the base of the mountain next to the auditorium. There we would establish a base camp, and soon after make our first assault on the mountain itself, establishing Camp 1 on the corner of Cottage and Mission. Our second assault, one that we expected to be quite dangerous due to traffic on Mission Street, would establish Camp 2 on the steps of Dorm 4. Then the third assault would establish Camp 3 on the upper part of the circle. From there would originate the last and final assault, the ascent to the highest peak, the lunchroom, and thus the achieving of our long-strived-for goals.
The jeep trip in, though a long and dangerous ride over rough and treacherous roads, went without incident, and the expedition arrived at 4th Street on schedule. The pack-in was long, treacherous, and difficult. Even to the most avid and experienced hiker, a trip like this might have seemed like a sufficient adventure in itself. However, to these three men, it was only a small step in a plan that would eventually lead them to the top of the world.
Often, before I even started the climb itself, the question why came up. Why do I do it? Or why do we all do it? To those looking for a material objective, there is no satisfactory answer, for there is indeed no desire nor expectation of any material reward. The answer can only be obtained perhaps in the simple phrase, because it's there. Because it's there, we climb it. For if it were not there, we could not climb it. And if we could not climb it, we could not climb it. Oh, drat! Oh, flaming puppies, never mind! Finally arriving at the base, we established camp and settled in for the night. Early on the morning of the 12th, we organized our party and prepared for the ascent. It was now the 22nd day of our expedition, and we were prepared to make our first assault in which we would establish Camp 1.
These were the men who conquered the lunchroom, who defied God's highest creation. But this man was not to savor the triumph for long. Paul J. Winthrop lost his life in the descent. Fellow climber John Chapman recalls the horrible mishap.
It was after we had reached the summit and were on our way back down to base camp. We were descending between camps 2 and 3. As it happened, Paul was below Arthur and me, and I remember him looking back up at us and making some rather obscene joke as to how he looked as we descended. And we thought, just to get back at him, that for a lark we'd cut his line, to leave him only with his emergency rope. Well, Paul didn't have an emergency rope that day. It was quite terrible, really.
The expedition prepared for the first assault. The ascent was extremely difficult and slow, demanding the utmost of skill from these men who dared lead the climb into the icy peaks.
On steep faces we would work, struggling for hours on end, and yet sometimes gaining a vertical distance of only a few feet or less.
There are three factors of awe-inspiring magnitude facing those who seek adventure among the highest peaks. They are this matter of vertical scale, the climatic conditions, and the climbing difficulties.
Though every bone in our bodies ached, we pushed on, for it was vital that we reach Camp 1 before nightfall.
Arriving in the late afternoon, after 10 grueling hours of slow but relentless ascent, the climbers moved quickly to set up Camp 1 before night's heavy darkness settled in. They knew that if they failed in establishing a camp before dark, they would surely perish in the icy cold of night. Mountain temperatures often plunged to less than 60 degrees, and high winds created a wind chill factor that further reduced the temperature to unimaginable extremes, such as 55 degrees. Early on the morning of the 16th, the expedition woke and prepared their second assault, which would bring them to Camp 2. They knew that this step would be one of the most dangerous climbs of the expedition, for they would have to scale Mission Street, evading its usually heavy flow of traffic.
In this climb, we had to traverse Mission Street during the middle of Tuesday morning rush hour traffic. Our main concern was how many tired commuters might there be who would miss their morning cup of coffee and thus might neglect to see us in our desperate attempts in crossing the road.
The expedition succeeded in crossing the treacherous Mission Street face and stopped for a much-needed rest on the east side of the street. At 12:04 p.m., the climbing expedition received an alarming radio message from their base camp.
Apparently, another expedition was heading up the other side. We knew that we were now in direct competition for the top of the mountain. And so we got started for our second camp on the steps of Dome 4 without delay.
However, when the expedition arrived at Dormitory 4, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Someone had been there before them. Laying in the snow were 3 blatant vestiges of the other expedition's previous stay. An empty bottle of liquid paper, a Benson & Hedges cigarette butt, and a strand from a double-knit polyester pantsuit.
Especially because the strand of polyester was lime green, these articles assured us that the other party consisted of office secretaries en route from the administration building to lunch, in the lunchroom, which was of course the very same goal that we pursued. The next morning we got an early start, trying to conserve as much time as possible in order to catch up with the office secretaries.
By now the expedition had reached an elevation of close to 28 feet, an elevation at which the air becomes dangerously thin, and oxygen equipment becomes essential to the climber's survival.
There was a sense of excitement in the air as we climbed. Each one of us knew that we would soon be arriving at the site of Camp 3, the final camp from which our climb to the summit would originate.
As the expedition ascended, the atmosphere was saturated with nervous tension and excitement. Each climber consciously realized that he was but one step away from achieving the final and long sought-after goal of conquering the forbidding summit.
Hold on, that's just like what I said.
Well, the script indicates that
Why don't you just shut up and let me have my own line?
But I really...
Now see here, I was there.
Yes, but I'm the narrator.
No,
and
yeah, I was a climber.
Camp 3 was to be their last rest before their final ascent of the summit. They knew that in order to reach the top, they must somehow avoid the heartbreak of their predecessors, when others had struggled upwards to within 1,000 feet of the goal, and with insufficient supplies had to turn back. They had to pass beyond this enchanted barrier, dispersing beforehand any spell by which the mountain might hold the trespasser hostage forever in its icy grip. The next day, the expedition embarked on the final, awe-inspiring, danger-filled, tedious climb of the treacherous, forbidding peak that would mark the termination of their long-strived-for goals.
All right, that's enough. I've had enough of all your awe-inspiring poppycock.
What do you mean?
You're always babbling on about how dangerous or difficult the climb was, how we had to suffer or perform some superhuman act or something. How do you know? It actually wasn't a very hard climb at all. In fact, I'm sick of you. You're always so bloody serious. Do you realize I've had to listen to your damn voice on every National Geographic special there is? That same ridiculous, stereotypical narrator voice, so pumped up with reverb, make you sound like God or something. How would you sound with it off? Let me see here.
Hey, get your hands off my mixer.
Oh, come on, you little wimp.
Let's just try to finish it up, shall we?
Oh, okay, all right. Just because I've come this far, I'll stick it out to the end. I suppose that if I climb that mountain, I can stand another few minutes with
page
you
12.
pseudo-intellectual commie.
Finally, after hours of difficult climbing on icy surfaces, the expedition reached the lunchroom.
Due to the fact that Abercrombie and Fitch were out of British flags, we had to use an old American one which I had been using as a tea cozy. When we actually entered the lunchroom, our weary bodies were rejuvenated by an inspiring sight. The secretaries had busied themselves with gossip and had neglected to plant their flag. If we could plant ours, then we would technically be the first country on record to reach the summit. Trying not to disturb the secretaries and alert them of our presence, we quickly snuck over to the highest point in the lunchroom, with our flag prepared.
On March 3rd, at 12:32 p.m., after years of precise planning and months of exhausting physical and mental toil, a miracle of human achievement was completed. 3 British explorers became the first men to fly their proud flag on top of the world.